Now what in this situation is the unconditioned stimulus? Fear is a response. Okay, so we'll put that down. Fear is a natural response to what?
Drowning.
To almost drowning. Okay. Fear is not a response to actual drowning because that's, well, I guess it depends on if you believe in heaven or hell. It could be, but okay. But if you actually die, it's probably a different emotional response. So almost drowning would obviously, I mean, you have to be insane to not feel fear if you almost drown. That's totally natural. Okay? So what got paired with almost drowning?
Water.
Water. Okay? So the neutral stimulus was paired with almost drowning. So now, remember, we can cut this part out. The almost drowning part doesn't matter anymore after classical conditioning has happened. So now what's the conditioned stimulus? Water. So now all it takes is water, not almost drowning, for what response? Fear. Okay? So now all she has to do is be around any amount of water. You can drink water, but that's about all she can handle. She said when she was my student, she hadn't taken a bath in 5 years. She just did sponge baths. I mean, she cleaned herself. She didn't smell. But she couldn't actually get in the shower without completely having a breakdown. That's how bad it was. Okay. So, isn't that interesting? How these fears are made. And this works for everything. We're constantly being conditioned. This means something else. And now we can take out that something else and just rely on the neutral stimulus. So we're constantly getting all of these triggers. And many of them, most of them I would say, we don't even know about. TV is great at using things. How can we get people to like a sitcom more? We put in fake laughter because laughter is a conditioned stimulus for positive feelings. You hear somebody else laugh, you automatically think better of the show. It's more enjoyable if there's fake laughing. As stupid as that fake laughter sounds, it actually works. If I want to... Go ahead.
You know, Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
The what?
Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Oh, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
Yeah, there was this one episode where they were filming their moms, and she was about to hit her with a hammer, but she woke up, so she hit her behind her back, and they're like, that's too dark. So they put a laugh track, and they actually started laughing at it because they thought it was funnier.
There you go. Okay? Yeah, so other people laughing tells our brain this must be funny. So even when it's not funny, our brain just says, that's funny, and we enjoy it. Okay? So this can be used to manipulate us a lot. And I think the more aware of it you are, the less likely you are to be manipulated. All right, so we can also have a conditioned emotional response. Now this is no different than classical conditioning, but we just categorize it separately because it has to do with emotions, and that's important. So you can be conditioned to have emotional responses to things, to feel happy, sad, angry, whatever. One of the biggest ones is avoidance learning. Your brain is designed to learn what to avoid. Because if you survive it the first time, you may not survive it the second time, so you better remember. It would be really bad for humanity if you walked into a cave, a grizzly bear chased you out and almost killed you, and then you forgot about it. Right? You don't forget about those things because the brain is designed to hold on to these negative situations. Hence why we get post-traumatic stress disorder. Food is particularly one thing that we learn avoidance learning. You have a bad experience with food. For instance, I love pluots. Has anybody had a pluot? It's a hybrid between an apricot and a plum. They're really closely related, so you can cross-pollinate the trees, and you get this like a mutt fruit called a pluot, which is amazing. It's so much better than an apricot or a plum. Try it. So my favorite fruit, as a matter of fact, my salivation stimulant responses thinking about pluots. So I love pluots. I usually get them from Costco, which has the best fruit, right? You've ever gone shopping there?
Costco has the best fruit.
Right? Costco's awesome. So I was lazy. I stopped at Stater Brothers and got some pluots, thinking, whatever, no big deal. I'm excited about it. I take a big bite out of it, and it was moldy. And I'm not talking a little moldy. It looked perfect on the outside. It was super moldy on the inside. Like powder, like puffs of powder. It was awful. And not only did it taste horrendous, but I'm allergic to mold. So then I had a bad allergic reaction. Okay? Now I still love pluots. I understand cognitively that this was one pluot out of like the million that I've eaten, and the chances of that happening again is tiny, like lottery winning status. Okay? But I cannot take a big bite out of a pluot. And this was even years ago. Okay? I cannot just take a nice big chunk out of a pluot. As a matter of fact, I either nibble it, or sometimes I'll even chop it up to make sure the inside is good before I can bite it. And there are times when I will buy pluots and they sit in the refrigerator and they go bad because I can't bring myself to eat them. Okay? So I've been traumatized by pluots. This is what we call avoidance learning. Now, it's such a stupid thing. It's a piece of fruit. Why did it affect me so much?
Because you were allergic to it.
Because I was allergic to it. Okay? Why else?
It was also really nasty.
It was nasty tasting.
You're scared something's going to happen to you.
Scared something's going to happen to me. Okay? So my brain particularly is scared something would happen to me. And the brain is designed to really hold firmly onto anything that might do you damage. So pluots have now been classified in my mind as something that could potentially kill you. And once you learn something in this category, the chances of your brain letting go of it are pretty slim. Because this is a survival mechanism. Okay? This is also why you can be so traumatized in life or death situations. Okay? If you were in that country music concert in Vegas, I guarantee you the next concert you go to, you're going to have anxiety. If you weren't in that concert, probably the next concert you go to is going to create anxiety. Okay? Because we've all heard about it on the news, and our brain goes, oh, concerts, dangerous. Okay? That's how our brain works, because it's trying to keep us alive.
I think I've experienced that to like a certain level, just because there's been like so many shootings at churches.
Yes.
And I spend a lot of my time at church, like they're almost every day, like.
Churches and movie theaters, probably the two most dangerous places for a shooter.
So I have experienced that too.
Yeah. Well, okay, schools. I'll put out a third one on. Yeah. So yeah, our brain is smart enough to know certain places have a higher likelihood of being dangerous. Now, our brain is not good at looking at things realistically. So like a pluot, what is the chances of me coming across another bad pluot? Very small. What is the chances of you getting shot in your church? Still very small, considering how many millions of churches there are in America. But your brain says, I've gotten a lot of information about this. I hear it all the time in the news, and so therefore it must be common. Okay, as smart as your brain is, you can still fool it in some ways. So the more you hear about things, the more your brain believes this is really dangerous. So how many of you, if you had children, you would be worried about them being kidnapped? Okay. Now, the chances of your kid being kidnapped by a stranger, in a country of 350 million plus people, we have 100 children kidnapped every year. That's it. And of those 100 kids kidnapped by strangers, only 3 don't come home alive. So the chances of your child being kidnapped by a stranger is almost non-existent. However, we're all terrified about it.
My sister was almost kidnapped when she was little.
By a stranger or by a family member?
By a stranger.
Okay, so she's one of the few. So it happens. And here's the thing. Because it's such a crazy, flamboyant sort of crime, we hear about it all the time. And your brain goes, well, it must be common. Even though it's really uncommon. It's very rare for that to happen. Now, kids kidnapped by family members is much more common. So, like, you get a divorce and the other custodial parent kidnaps a kid and tries to take off with him. That's fairly common. Still is not all that common. Like, the chances of your kid dying in a car accident, way higher likelihood of even being kidnapped by a family member. Than being kidnapped by a stranger, like, you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning 10 times. And yet, what are we more afraid of, lightning or our kids getting kidnapped? Our kids getting kidnapped. What's scarier, crashing in a plane, or getting on a plane and being afraid of crashing, or getting in a car? The plane. People are terrified of planes. And yet, one of the statistics after September 11th, because people were afraid to get into a plane, people canceled their plane tickets and drove in cars, and they believe that probably 3,000 additional people died because of car accidents who would have been alive because they were supposed to take planes. So somebody did a study on that. So September 11th killed more than just the 3,000 people in the World Trade Center. Interesting, huh? All right. So our brain can be tricked into believing something is more scary and more common than it actually is. And again, this is how we get phobias. It's how you get a phobia of a plane. It's how you get phobias of your children being kidnapped. And I think our society has a societal phobia of kidnappings. To the point where the fact that we keep our kids indoors so much has led to skyrocketing obesity, skyrocketing depression, skyrocketing suicide. So the chances of your kid getting kidnapped are almost zero. Chances of, because the way you raise them so sheltered, then committing suicide down the road is really high. So what's really safer for your kids? Letting them go out and play on their own. That's what's safer. But the news doesn't plaster it all over, social media and the TV saying, oh, kid committed suicide because parent wouldn't let them go out and play outdoors. Right? You never hear that. All right, so little Albert is, of course, the classic phobia experiment. Making a kid afraid of a little white rat. And this, by the way, generalized to anything white and fluffy, including Santa Claus. Terrible experiment, right? Would not be considered ethical nowadays, but this was the 20s, I think. It was his foster parent, poor kid. And, of course, she wanted money from the experiment, so as some foster parents will do, she cared more about the money than the kid. Now, a lot of people have wanted to know what happened to little Albert. Did he keep his phobia? And a few years ago, they actually discovered the answer. He died of tuberculosis at 7, I think. So we don't know if that phobia would have stuck around or not. But the answer is it would have depended on how the people around him acted. So if somebody in the family had a white rat as a pet, he would have gotten over that phobia. Because over time, the brain can relearn things. So even if it learned to be afraid of it, it can learn to be unafraid of it. So possibly if I eat enough pluots, I won't keep having that reaction to pluots. But what a lot of people with anxiety do is they avoid the thing that triggers the anxiety. And every time you avoid it, for instance, if you're a soldier, you come back from war, and you start having panic attacks in crowds, that makes sense if you're in Iraq, and a crowd could mean a suicide bomber, or somebody ambushing you or something. It makes total sense. But then you come home and you go to the mall at Victor Valley, and you have a panic attack. That doesn't make sense. Okay? So what happens is these soldiers will come back, they'll go into a crowded area, start to get anxious, and then they'll be like, I can't handle this, I'm going back to the car. And they calm down, but what their brain goes is, see, I told you that was dangerous. Let's put that even more firmly into the memory banks as something that's dangerous. And so every time they avoid the situation, the brain goes, yep, it's dangerous, it's going to kill you. Until you can't wash your face with water because your brain is so convinced that you're going to die. I'm going to have nightmares about that thing. Conditioned hatred towards the speaker. All right, so we also have what's called biological preparedness and contra-preparedness. And this means that we are more likely to become afraid of certain types of objects. A desk, for instance, is unlikely to give you a phobia. A marker is unlikely to give you a phobia. It's possible, but it's unlikely. Something, if I throw it at you enough times, you may get a phobia. Or of me. You're more likely to get it of me, though. So a phobia of a living creature makes sense, right? It makes more sense for you to be afraid of a rat than a desk or a monkey. Okay? So that is biological preparedness. So for instance, a block of wood you are not biologically prepared to have a phobia to. This is what we call contra-preparedness. It's not written into our brain that this is something that is worth being afraid of. Okay. But something like a rattle, oh, sorry. I always forget that recording is there. I'll just turn it off. A rattlesnake. You hate that noise, right? People in the desert react more to that sound than people outside of the desert. So we know what it means, right? We've been conditioned. Okay? So fear of a rattlesnake makes sense. Okay? Now, can you get a phobia to a block of wood? Yes, it's possible. But it usually takes more to develop that fear, and you usually have to be more sensitive of a person to develop that fear. All right, a few more concepts. Stimulus, generalization, and discrimination. As I said, little Albert generalized his fear to anything that was similar to a rat. This is what we call generalization. So he's afraid of Santa and his white fluffy beard. He's afraid of a white fluffy dog. He's afraid of a white fluffy teddy bear. He generalized it. This is important because you don't want to be afraid of, one bear that you see, like, oh, I'm afraid of that bear. But then another bear comes wandering up and you're like, oh, it's a different bear. Maybe I shouldn't be afraid of this one, right? That would be stupid. So your brain needs to be able to generalize to many similar things. If you see another creature that's bear-like, but you're not sure if it's a bear, you'll probably at least be leery of it until you figure out whether it's dangerous or not, and that could keep you alive. Okay. Now, stimulus discrimination is also important. Discrimination means setting things apart. Okay? So it doesn't mean racism, it means that I'm going to treat you differently. And this is important psychologically because, for instance, you should be afraid of rattlesnakes, but should you be afraid of a boa constrictor? Some of you are like, yes. You're generalizing. Okay? Boa constrictors are, assuming you don't have like a 12-foot long boa constrictor that's out to get you, most boa constrictors are not dangerous, and they're pets.